Jimmy, that's my toothbrush. This was the third time this week. I stood in the bathroom doorway watching my roommate Jimmy Brooks grin at me with foam dripping from his mouth, my toothbrush wedged between his teeth like it belonged there. He shrugged, completely unbothered. Bro, they're basically the same. No, they absolutely were not. Jimmy and I had been roommates since sophomore year of college. The first year was normal, respectful distance, our own routines, the occasional shared pizza. But now I felt like I'd become his personal property. He wore my hoodies without asking, devoured my snacks, sprawled across my bed to watch Netflix, and whenever I was on the phone he'd drift closer, shamelessly listening in on my conversations. I was a closeted gay man. Jimmy was straight, or at least he'd never said otherwise. He'd had girlfriends before, plenty of them. So this clinginess, maybe this was just how he operated. Bros being bros, right? But if I listened to my heart, it was telling an entirely different story. Jimmy, I said, snatching my toothbrush from his hand. Personal space is a thing. You know, he looked at me with those blue-green eyes, his messy brown hair falling across his forehead. That stupid lopsided grin making my knees weak. Why? Are you hiding something from me, Miles? Miles. That was my name. Miles Carter. And when he said it like that, standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, it became difficult to breathe. No, I answered quickly. Maybe too quickly. I just need some boundaries. He laughed, the sound echoing off the bathroom tiles. Boundaries? Dude, we've been sharing a room for over a year. When did we ever have boundaries? He had a point. But I needed them now. Because my feelings for him were growing stronger every day, and I couldn't risk ruining what we had. Jimmy was straight. I didn't want to make things weird, didn't want to be that guy who fell for his oblivious straight roommate. So I made a decision. I would set boundaries, create some distance between us. But Jimmy had other plans. The next afternoon, I was buried in my psychology textbook at the library, trying to focus on cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, when suddenly a shadow fell across my page. Jimmy dropped into the chair across from me, his backpack hitting the table with a thud. Let's grab dinner, he announced. Jimmy, I'm studying. You can study later. Come on. He closed my notebook before I could protest, his fingers brushing against mine. I lost. I always lost when it came to him. After dinner at the campus cafeteria where he stole half my fries despite ordering his own, we headed back to the apartment. I was about to retreat to my room when Jimmy grabbed my wrist, his grip gentle but insistent. Want to watch a movie? He asked. Jimmy, please, Miles. His voice softened, becoming almost vulnerable. I had a really rough day. Then he looked at me with an expression that made me feel like I was the only person in his entire world. I melted instantly, all my resolve evaporating. We settled onto the couch. The movie started, some action thriller he'd picked, but I couldn't focus on the explosions or chase scenes. Jimmy sat right next to me, so close that his shoulder pressed against mine. I could feel his body heat, smell his scent, a mixture of fresh laundry and something woody that made my head spin. Then, without warning, he rested his head on my shoulder. My heart stopped. Jimmy, shh, just watch the movie. But watching the movie was impossible. All I could think about was how close he was, how naturally he'd placed his hand on my thigh when something funny happened on screen, his fingers spreading warmth through the fabric of my jeans. This wasn't normal. Straight guys didn't do this. Or did they? Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I lay in my own bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I would establish those boundaries. No more shared toothbrushes, no more stolen hoodies, no more movie nights where he used me as a pillow. Tomorrow, everything would change. But then Jimmy's door creaked open and he poked his head into the hallway, his hair adorably messed up from lying down. Good night, Miles, he said softly, giving me that smile that demolished every wall I tried to build. And just like that, my resolve crumbled again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that he couldn't keep doing this to me. Couldn't keep being so affectionate and tactile when he didn't understand what it was doing to my heart. But I said nothing. I just watched him disappear back into his room, leaving me alone with my conflicted feelings. The next morning, I woke up determined. Today would be different. I would talk to him, explain that I needed space, that his behavior was confusing and I couldn't handle it anymore. But when I walked into the kitchen, Jimmy was already there, making coffee. He'd made an extra cup for me, exactly how I liked it, with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. He handed it to me with a smile that could light up the entire apartment. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Morning." I managed taking the mug from him, our fingers touching briefly. "I was thinking we could check out that new arcade downtown later," he continued, leaning against the counter. "They have vintage games from the 90s. I don't know if I can. Come on, it'll be fun." When was the last time we actually did something together off campus? He was right. Despite living together, despite his constant presence in my space, we hadn't actually gone out and done something fun in weeks. And the hopeful look in his eyes made it impossible to say no. "Okay," I agreed, "but just for a couple hours." His face lit up and he actually fist-pumped the air like he'd won something important. It was adorable and frustrating and everything in between. That evening at the arcade, Jimmy was in his element. He dominated at Street Fighter, laughed when I beat him at racing games, and won me a stuffed bear from the claw machine after 6 attempts. When he handed it to me, he said, "For you, so you remember today," as if I could ever forget. Walking back to the apartment, he bumped his shoulder against mine playfully and I realized something terrifying. Setting boundaries with Jimmy was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done, because every fiber of my being wanted him closer, not further away. But I had to do it, for my own sanity, for the sake of our friendship. "Tomorrow," I promised myself once more as we climbed the stairs to our apartment, his laughter echoing in the stairwell. Tomorrow I would finally find the courage to push him away, even if it broke my heart in the process. The coffee shop was quiet for a Tuesday morning, just the hiss of the espresso machine and soft indie music playing overhead. I had my laptop open, pretending to work on an essay about developmental psychology, but mostly I was thinking about Jimmy. Again, always. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up to find a guy standing beside my table. Dark, curly hair that fell just above his eyebrows, warm hazel eyes, a leather jacket that looked effortlessly cool. He was attractive in a way that made you do a double take. "No, go ahead," I said, gesturing to the empty chair. He sat down, setting his coffee cup on the table between us. "I'm Jorge Rivers, Miles." "I know," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "I've seen you in Professor Henderson's psychology class. You always sit in the front row, taking notes like your life depends on it." I felt my cheeks warm. Someone had noticed me. I didn't think anyone paid attention to where I sat. "I pay attention," Jorge said, and there was something in the way he said it that made my pulse quicken. We started talking and conversation flowed easily. He told me about his major art history with a minor in music theory, and his passion for vintage vinyl records. I told him about my psychology degree and my dream of becoming a therapist. He made me laugh with stories about his chaotic family and terrible experiences with online dating. When he pulled out his phone and offered me his number saying, "Text me sometime, I'd like to continue this conversation," I felt something shift inside me. Maybe this was an opportunity, a chance to distract myself from my impossible feelings for Jimmy. So I texted him that evening. Jorge replied within minutes, his messages witty and warm and just flirtatious enough to make my intentions clear. Over the next 2 weeks we saw each other regularly. Lunch between classes, an afternoon at the arcade where he absolutely destroyed me at pinball, a concert downtown where the music was so loud we could barely talk, but Jorge held my hand in the crowd so we wouldn't get separated, and he didn't let go even when the crush of people thinned out. Jorge was openly bisexual, confident in himself in a way I envied. With him, I didn't have to hide. I could be myself, openly gay, openly interested. He looked at me like I was someone worth wanting, and it felt incredible. But every time I came home, Jimmy's face would appear and everything became complicated again. "Where were you?" Jimmy asked one evening as I walked through the door. He was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but I could tell he'd been waiting for me. "Out. With a friend." "What friend?" His tone was sharp, almost accusatory. I'd never heard him sound like this before. "Jorge, someone from my psychology class." Jimmy's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. "How long have you known him?" "A couple weeks. And you didn't think to mention him to me?" I frowned, confused by his reaction. I don't have to report everyone I meet to you, Jimmy. He went quiet, but something flickered in his eyes, hurt maybe, or anger, I couldn't tell which. Fine, he said shortly, standing up and walking toward his room. The door closed behind him with more force than necessary. The next day, everything felt different. Jimmy was distant, giving me one-word answers when I tried to talk to him. No jokes, no casual touches, no stolen glances across the apartment. It was exactly the space I'd claimed to want, but now that I had it, it felt suffocating. That evening, Jorge texted me, "Missing you already. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." I smiled at my phone, typing a reply, but I felt Jimmy's presence before I saw him. He'd come out of his room and was standing in the kitchen doorway, his eyes fixed on my screen. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Nobody, Miles." His voice dropped lower, taking on an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. "Who is it?" "It's personal, Jimmy." He moved closer, crossing the space between us in 3 long strides until he stood right in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of green in his blue eyes. "Personal?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since when do we keep secrets?" My heart was racing, but this time it wasn't from attraction. It was from frustration, from weeks of confusion and mixed signals. "Why do you care so much? You're always in my space, always touching me, always acting like..." I cut myself off, not trusting myself to continue. "Acting like what?" he demanded. "Like you own me." The words burst out before I could stop them. "You're straight, Jimmy. You had a girlfriend last semester. So why are you being so possessive over who I spend time with?" He stepped back as if I'd physically pushed him, shock and hurt written clearly across his face. "I'm not being possessive," he said quietly. I care about you, Miles." "Is that so wrong?" "There's a difference between caring and suffocating someone." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and cutting. Jimmy stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then without another word he grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and left the apartment. I stood there in the sudden silence, guilt washing over me in waves. My phone buzzed with another message from Jorge, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it, because all I could think about was Jimmy out there somewhere in the dark, and the hurt I'd seen in his eyes before he walked away. Had I been too harsh? Was I pushing away the one person who mattered most to me, just because I was scared of my own feelings? I didn't know anymore. Jorge represented possibility, something real and uncomplicated, someone who actually wanted me. But Jimmy was embedded in every corner of my life, in every routine and habit. Losing him would be like losing a part of myself. I went to bed that night without seeing Jimmy come home. My mind a mess of conflicting emotions. Tomorrow maybe we could talk things through. Tomorrow maybe I could figure out what I really wanted. But as I lay in the darkness, listening for the sound of his key in the lock, I realized something terrifying. I already knew what I wanted. I just didn't know if I could have it. Jimmy stopped talking to me entirely. Mornings were silent. He'd make his coffee and leave before I even got out of bed. Evenings were worse. He'd come home late, go straight to his room and lock the door. The apartment that used to feel alive with his presence now felt like a tomb. I'd wanted space, but not like this. Not this cold, empty void between us. Jorge filled some of that emptiness. He was attentive, romantic in ways that should have made me happy. He brought me sunflowers one afternoon. Having noticed the sunflower sticker on my laptop, we went to a poetry reading together, and afterward, when the night air was crisp and the streets were quiet, he kissed. It was a good kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. But even with Jorge's lips on mine, I thought of Jimmy. How messed up was that? One night, I came home late from a date with Jorge. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of the television. Jimmy sat on the couch, still dressed in his clothes from the day, staring blankly at the screen. "You're still awake?" I asked quietly. He didn't look at me. Couldn't sleep. I moved closer, sitting on the opposite end of the couch, leaving careful distance between us. "Can we talk about what happened?" "What's there to talk about? This thing between us." "There is no thing between us, Miles." Finally he turned to look at me, and his eyes were bloodshot, exhausted. "You're busy with your new guy. I get it. I don't want to be in your way." "Jimmy, how is he?" he interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. "Your Jorge? I didn't answer. Is he better than me? The question came out raw, vulnerable, more interesting, more enough for you. That's not a fair question. He stood up abruptly, towering over me. I'm asking you, Miles. Was I ever enough? Or have you been waiting for someone else this whole time? I had no words. My throat felt tight, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jimmy moved to stand directly in front of me, his presence overwhelming. Do you even see me? Of course I see you. I whispered. No. He shook his head slowly. You see your straight roommate. You see the guy you think you have to keep at arm's length. But you don't see me. Then he said the words that changed everything. I'm not straight, Miles. I never have been. The world tilted on its axis. I'm in love with you, Jimmy continued, his voice shaking. I have been for 8 months. Maybe longer. I was terrified to tell you because I didn't know how you'd react. So I convinced myself that being close to you was enough. That wearing your clothes and falling asleep on your shoulder and spending every possible moment with you was just friendship. But then you met him and I can't. His voice broke. I can't pretend anymore. Tears streamed down my face without permission. If you want Jorge, that's okay, Jimmy said. And I'd never heard him sound so defeated. I want you to be happy. But I need to know for sure. Tell me clearly so I can try to move on. What could I say? How could I explain that my heart had been beating for him all along? I do like Jorge, I admitted, the words painful to speak. He's kind and funny and everything I should want. But he's not you. Jimmy froze, staring at me like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. He's not you, Jimmy, I repeated, standing up so we were face to face. I've wanted you since the day you first stole my hoodie and looked so good in it I couldn't even be mad. I've wanted you through every movie night, every casual touch, every moment you made me feel like I mattered. But I thought you were straight. I thought I was just your friend, and that had to be enough. His hands came up to cup my face, his touch gentle and reverent. You're everything to me. Then he kissed me. It was nothing like Jorge's kiss. This was desperate and deep and tasted like coming home after a long journey. This was every unsaid word, every suppressed feeling, every moment of longing finally breaking free. When we broke apart, we were both crying. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I was trying to protect myself, but I hurt you instead. Stay, he whispered, pressing his forehead against mine. Please just stay with me. So I did. I let him pull me down onto the couch, let him wrap his arms around me like he'd never let go. We stayed like that for hours, talking in whispers about everything we'd been too afraid to say before. He told me about the moment he realized his feelings when I'd fallen asleep on his shoulder during finals week last semester. Drool on his shirt, and he'd looked down at me and thought, I want every night to be like this. I told him about all the times I'd had to leave the room because being near him was too painful, too intense, too much like wanting something I could never have. I saw you with him, Jimmy admitted quietly. At the coffee shop downtown. You were laughing at something he said, and you looked so happy. I realized I'd been selfish, keeping you so without being honest about why. You deserved someone who could actually be with you. I don't want someone else, I said firmly. I want you. I've always wanted you. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine. What about Jorge? I'll talk to him tomorrow, end things properly. He deserves honesty. Jimmy nodded, then kissed me again, softer this time, sweeter like a promise. We fell asleep on the couch that night, tangled together in a way that felt both completely new and like something we'd been doing forever. When I woke up a few hours later, dawn light filtering through the windows, Jimmy was already awake, watching me with an expression so tender it made my chest ache. What? I asked sleepily. Nothing, he said, brushing hair back from my forehead. Just thinking about how I almost lost you. You didn't. I'm right here. Promise me you'll stay right here. I kissed him instead of answering, pouring every ounce of feeling into it. When we finally broke apart, I whispered against his lips, I promise. Always. And for the first time in months, everything felt right. Morning felt different. I woke up in Jimmy's bed, our limbs tangled together after spending the entire night talking. He'd opened up about everything. How he'd slowly realized his feelings weren't just friendship. How he'd been quietly coming to terms with his sexuality. How every time I mentioned another guy or smiled at my phone, it felt like something was crushing his chest. I became so clingy because I was terrified of losing you, he admitted, his fingers tracing patterns through my hair. Every time you talked to someone else, I panicked. I thought if I kept you enough, you wouldn't notice anyone else. I could never forget you, I whispered back. But reality was waiting outside this peaceful bubble. There was still one conversation I needed to have. One person who deserved honesty. Jorge. I texted him that morning asking to meet at the coffee shop, the same place where we'd first talked. It felt appropriate somehow, closing this circle where it had begun. When Jorge arrived, he was smiling, but the expression faded the moment he saw my face. He knew, maybe he'd always known. What's wrong? He asked, sliding into the seat across from me. Jorge, we need to talk. He nodded slowly, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. It's about your roommate, right? I stared at him, surprised. How did you know? A sad smile crossed his face. Miles, the way you talked about him, your whole face changed whenever his name came up. Your eyes would get this faraway look, like you were somewhere else entirely. I hoped maybe with time you'd look at me that way instead. Guilt washed over me. Jorge, I'm so sorry. I never meant to. Stop. He held up a hand. You didn't lead me on. You genuinely liked me and I liked you too. We had something real, but liking someone and being in love with someone are completely different things. Tears pricked at my eyes. You deserve so much better than this. Maybe, he agreed, but his tone was gentle. But I also deserve someone who chooses me first, not as a distraction or a backup plan. And you deserve to be with the person you're actually in love with. We hugged goodbye, a real embrace, full of genuine care and no hard feelings. When we pulled apart, Jorge squeezed my shoulder. Take care of yourself, Miles, and tell Jimmy he's lucky. Walking back to the apartment felt surreal, like I was floating several inches above the ground. When I opened the door, Jimmy was pacing in the living room, clearly anxious. How did it go? He asked immediately, his voice tight with nerves. I told him everything. And now I'm here. With you, where I want to be. Jimmy's face broke into the most radiant smile I'd ever seen. Then, in one swift motion, he picked me up and spun me around, both of us laughing like idiots. You're insane, I said, breathless. Only for you, he replied, setting me down and kissing me deeply. But even in the midst of happiness, fear crept in. Later that evening, as we sat curled up on the couch, I voiced the worry that had been nagging at me. What if we mess this up? What if being together ruins everything we had? Jimmy pulled back to look at me seriously. Then we'll fix it. Miles, I've watched you for over a year. I know how you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I know you reorganize the bookshelf when you're stressed. I know you have nightmares about failing your exams and that you cry at animal rescue videos. I'm not scared of who you are. I'm only scared of losing you. You won't lose me, I promised, lacing my fingers through his. Ever. He grinned, that possessive gleam returning to his eyes. Good, because you're officially mine now, Miles Carter. Possessive much? I teased. Absolutely, he said without shame. The whole world is going to know you're taken. He proved it the next day on campus. As we walked to class, Jimmy reached over and took my hand in front of everyone. Students stared. Whispers started immediately. But Jimmy didn't flinch, didn't let go, didn't show even a hint of embarrassment. Let them stare, he said firmly. I'm not hiding you. I'm not hiding us. Then, right there in the middle of the quad with dozens of people watching, he leaned down and kissed my forehead tenderly. My heart felt like it might burst from my chest. A girl from my psychology class gave me a thumbs up. A couple of guys from Jimmy's fraternity hollered encouragement. Others just looked curious or confused. But none of it mattered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. I was standing in broad daylight with the person I loved, and it felt like freedom. That night, Jimmy pulled me close in bed and whispered against my temple, "Thank you." For what? For taking a chance on us. For not giving up when things got complicated. For being brave enough to feel this. I turned to face him, our noses nearly touching. You're the brave one. You risked our entire friendship by telling me how you felt. It was worth it, he said simply. You're worth it. We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, finally able to be exactly what we'd both wanted all along. The next morning I woke before Jimmy and watched him sleep, his messy brown hair sticking up in every direction, the peaceful expression on his face, the slight smile on his lips even in dreams. This was my Bivrig. This beautiful, infuriating, perfect person chose me. When his eyes fluttered open and found me watching, he smiled wider. "Morning creep," he mumbled. "Morning bedhog." He pulled me closer, if that was even possible. "Get used to it, you're stuck with me now. I can think of worse fates." We spent that Saturday doing absolutely nothing productive. Staying in pajamas, watching terrible movies, making elaborate breakfasts at 2 in the afternoon. It was domestic and simple and everything I'd ever wanted. At one point Jimmy was making grilled cheese sandwiches while I sat on the counter, and he looked over at me with such pure affection that I had to say it. "I love you." He set down the spatula and moved to stand between my knees, his hands resting on my thighs. "Say it again." "I love you, Jimmy Brooks." "One more time." "I love you, you ridiculous man." He kissed me, soft and sweet and tasting like the coffee we'd been sharing. "I love you too, Miles. More than I knew it was possible to love someone." The grilled cheese burned, filling the apartment with smoke, but neither of us cared. We were too busy laughing, kissing, being completely and utterly happy. This was what it felt like to be chosen. To be loved, to finally be home. Being boyfriends was different from being roommates who were secretly in love. Jimmy was openly affectionate now, holding my hand constantly, stealing kisses at random moments, leaving cute notes in my textbooks. Mornings meant waking up to his arms around me. Nights meant falling asleep to the sound of his breathing. It was everything I'd dreamed of, but it also came with challenges I hadn't anticipated. Living with your boyfriend 24/7 meant seeing all the annoying habits you'd previously overlooked. Jimmy never washed dishes immediately, leaving them to soak for days. I left my textbooks scattered everywhere, creating obstacle courses throughout the apartments. He stayed up late gaming with headphones on, the clicking of his controller keeping me awake. I woke absurdly early, disturbing him when I got ready for morning classes. The breaking point came over something completely ridiculous. Toothpaste. "Jimmy, just put the cap back on." I snapped, holding up the dried-out tube. "It's just a cap, Miles. It's about basic hygiene and consideration. It's about you being a control freak." We both froze. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and cutting. We'd never actually fought like this before. Not when it counted. Not when we were together. Jimmy exhaled slowly, running his hands through his hair. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean that." "Then why did you say it?" "Because I'm not used to this." He gestured between us. Being in a relationship, having to think about someone else's preferences constantly. Before, I was single and could do whatever I wanted. Now every decision affects you and sometimes it's overwhelming. My anger deflated instantly. It's overwhelming for me too. I've never lived with a boyfriend before. I don't know how to balance being your partner and maintaining my own space. We stood there in the bathroom, both realizing we were in uncharted territory. "We need to figure this out," Jimmy said quietly. "I don't want to lose you over toothpaste caps." Despite the tension, I laughed. "That would be a terrible breakup story." He smiled, pulling me into his arms. "Let's make a deal. Better communication, more patience, and I'll actually put the cap back on. And I'll try to be less rigid about every little thing." We sealed the agreement with a kiss. And just like that, our first real fight was over. But outside our apartment, other challenges were brewing. Campus reactions to our relationship were mixed. The queer community welcomed us warmly. Several people from the LGBTQ student group invited us to events and game nights. Some students were simply curious, asking polite questions about how we got together. Others were less kind, whispering when we passed or making uncomfortable jokes. One afternoon, a guy from Jimmy's old friend group confronted him at the gym. "Dude, when did you turn gay?" Jimmy barely looked up from his weights. "I didn't turn anything. I've always been attracted to guys. You just assumed otherwise, but you dated Sarah and Jennifer, and now I'm dating Miles." Jimmy's tone was casual but firm. "People are complex. Sexuality isn't always obvious." I heard about the conversation later and it made me incredibly proud. Jimmy wasn't apologizing or explaining himself excessively. He was just existing authentically, but the real test came when his parents called. Someone had told them, Probably a well-meaning relative who'd seen pictures on social media. Jimmy went pale when he saw his mother's name on the caller ID. "They're conservative," he admitted, his hand shaking slightly. "I don't know how they'll react." I grabbed his hand. "Whatever happens, I'm here." I stayed quiet during the call, but I could hear his mother's clipped tone, his father's heavy silence. Jimmy kept his composure, speaking respectfully but standing firm. "I'm dating Miles. This is my decision and it's not up for debate." His mother said something I couldn't quite catch, her voice rising. "No, I'm not confused. No, this isn't a phase. This is who I am." More arguing from the other end. "I understand you're upset, but I need you to understand something too. Miles makes me happy. Happier than I've ever been. And if you can't accept that, then we'll have a problem." The call ended badly. No resolution, no acceptance, just strained goodbyes and unspoken disappointment. After hanging up, Jimmy sat motionless on the couch, staring at nothing. I wrapped my arms around him from behind. "I'm so proud of you." "They hate it," he whispered. "They hate me." "They don't hate you. They're scared and confused. But you stood your ground." He turned in my arms, his eyes glistening. "What if they never come around? Then we'll deal with it, together." I cupped his face gently. "You have me. You have friends who support you. You have a whole life ahead of you that doesn't depend on their approval. Is it selfish that having you feels like enough?" "No. It's honest." That night we grew closer in a different way. The physical intimacy we danced around finally happened. Slow, gentle, filled with whispered reassurances and tender touches. It wasn't just about desire, it was about vulnerability, about trust, about showing each other the most hidden parts of ourselves. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Jimmy traced idle patterns on my shoulder. "I love you, Miles." I looked up at him, at those blue-green eyes that had captured my heart from the beginning. "I love you too, Jimmy. So much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared. The kind that means this matters. The kind that means I have something real to lose." He kissed my forehead. "You're not going to lose me. I promise." We fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in promises we intended to keep. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. We learned each other's boundaries, figured out how to fight fair and make up better. We discovered that Jimmy got grumpy if he didn't eat breakfast, and I needed at least 30 minutes of quiet time in the morning. He learned to warn me before inviting friends over, and I learned to be more spontaneous. We weren't perfect. We still argued occasionally about whose turn it was to buy groceries, about how loud was too loud for music, about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It didn't, but Jimmy was wrong about many things. But we were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, him chopping vegetables while I stirred pasta, he looked over at me and smiled. "What?" I asked. "Nothing. Just thinking about how lucky I am. Lucky that I tolerate your terrible cooking skills." He flicked water at me from the sink. "Lucky that I found someone who matches my weirdness." I set down the spoon and crossed to him, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind. "I'm the lucky one." And in that moment, in our tiny kitchen with sauce bubbling on the stove and music playing softly in the background, everything felt perfect. The semester was winding down, finals approaching with terrifying speed. Jimmy and I had found our rhythm by now, a comfortable balance of studying together, supporting each other through stress, and stealing moments of peace between the chaos. Our relationship had matured beyond the initial honeymoon phase into something deeper and more stable. But a new question loomed on the horizon. What happened next? Summer break was approaching. Jimmy planned to visit his hometown to face his parents in person and try to mend that relationship. I was heading back to my family in another state. We'd be apart for 3 months. "Long distance?" I asked one night while we were packing boxes, preparing to store some of our things. Jimmy stopped folding clothes and looked at me seriously. "Do you trust what we have?" "Yes." "Then we'll make it work." His voice was confident, certain. "I can't imagine spending 3 months without you, Miles. Distance doesn't change how I feel." But saying it and living it were different things. The day Jimmy left was harder than I'd expected. We stood at the airport, both trying not to cry and failing miserably. "Call me every day," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Video chat every night," he countered, wiping tears from my cheeks with his thumbs. And if you need anything, Miles. He pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine. We're going to be okay. This isn't goodbye. It's just see you later. He kissed me then, deep and desperate and full of every emotion we couldn't put into words. I love you, he whispered against my lips. I love you too. His flight was called. We separated reluctantly, both looking back multiple times until he disappeared through security. I stayed until his plane took off, watching it climb into the sky and carry him away from me. The first week apart was brutal. The apartment felt empty without him. His coffee mug sat unused in the cupboard. His side of the bed stayed cold. I kept reaching for him at night, only to find empty space. But we adapted. Video calls became our lifeline, talking for hours about our days, falling asleep on camera so we could pretend we were together. He told me about his parents, how conversations were still tense but slowly improving. I told him about my family's reaction to coming out officially, which had been surprisingly supportive. My mom wants to meet you, I admitted during one call. Jimmy's face lit up on the screen. Really? She said, anyone who makes me this happy deserves a proper introduction. I can't wait. What should I bring? Do you think she'll like me? Jimmy, I interrupted, laughing. She'll love you. Just be yourself. 6 weeks into summer, Jimmy called with big news. My parents asked about you, he said, sounding almost disbelieving. Actually asked. They want to know what you're studying, what your plans are. It's progress, Miles. Real progress. Relief flooded through me. That's amazing. I told them when the fall semester starts, I want to officially introduce you. No more avoiding it. No more pretending you're just my roommate. Tears welled in my eyes. Are you sure? I don't want to push. I'm sure. You're part of my life, Miles. The most important part. They need to understand that. When we finally reunited at the airport for fall semester, it was like a scene from a movie. We saw each other across the terminal and ran, colliding in a hug that nearly knocked us both over. I missed you so much. Jimmy breathed into my neck, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. I missed you too. Every single day. We kissed right there in the middle of the airport, not caring who saw or what they thought. Returning to the apartment felt surreal. Everything was exactly as we'd left it, but somehow it felt different, more like home than just a place we lived. We spent the entire day reconnecting, cooking together, laughing over inside jokes, simply existing in each other's presence. It felt like breathing again after holding my breath for months. That night, lying in bed together, Jimmy propped himself up on one elbow and looked at me with unusual seriousness. I've been thinking about something all summer. What? Next year when we graduate, let's get our own place. Not a dorm, not student housing, an actual apartment. Just us. My heart started racing. Are you serious? Completely serious. I want to build a life with you, Miles. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to argue about furniture placement and who's cooking dinner. I want everything. Tears streamed down my face. Happy tears this time. I want that too. All of it. He smiled, wiping my tears away gently. Then it settled. After graduation, we start our real life together. This feels pretty real already, I pointed out. You know what I mean. No more temporary housing. No more uncertainty. Just us. Building something permanent. I pulled him down for a kiss, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude into it. When we broke apart, I whispered, I can't wait to see what we build. Me neither. We spent the rest of the night talking about the future, what kind of apartment we wanted, what city we might move to, what our lives could look like. It was exciting and terrifying and absolutely perfect. The next morning, I woke to find Jimmy already awake, watching me with that soft expression he got sometimes. What are you thinking about? I asked sleepily. Just how different things were a year ago, how I spent months being too scared to tell you how I felt. And now here we are, planning our future together. I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. Best decision you ever made. Telling me, best decision we both made, he corrected. Choosing each other despite the complications. There weren't any other options. It's always been you. He kissed me softly, sweetly, like a promise. Always will be you. As we lay there in the morning light, wrapped around each other, I realized this was what happiness felt like. Not some grand dramatic gesture or perfect fairy tale moment. Just this choosing each other every day, building something real together, facing whatever came next as a team. Jimmy wasn't just my clingy roommate anymore. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my partner, my home, my future, and I couldn't wait to see where that future took us. Ready to start our last year of college? Jimmy asked, pulling me closer. Ready for anything as long as you're there. He grinned. Always. And that was a promise we both intended to keep today, tomorrow, and every day after that.